In Tantra, we're letting go of our identity. It's a surrender of the identity into this wisdom that it's all sacred, that it's all sacred, it's all changing. Tantra is not about renunciation or even gradually transforming obstacles through compassion, but seeing the entire world as divine, as a manifestation of the mother with a capital M.
Welcome to Dale Borglum's Healing at the Edge. We are very happy to share with you Dale's profound insight and open heart. Please go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/Dale to support this podcast.
So today I'd like to talk about the Tantra of grief. Tantra is the quality of diving into the world, seeing it all as God. It's all grace. It's hard to see some things as grace. It's hard to see the war in the Middle East as grace. It's hard to see your friend having cancer, that is grace. The only way to do that is if we have deep compassion. If we can open our hearts to the suffering that's all around. And we really can't have compassion until we're able to deal with the grief of being in a body. What I've been seeing with my clients and in my own practice is that there's a subtle grief. I'm not talking right now necessarily about the grief that somebody close to you is dying or the grief that the world is falling apart, but just this more subtle grief of separation from self, separation from God. Rumi says grief can be the garden of compassion. And what I've been working with in my own practice, and particularly in a few of my clients who are fairly advanced meditators, they've been meditating for a long time, they have a very strong practice, but there's still this place of I'm doing it, and sometimes it's a good meditation, sometimes it's a bad meditation. That by beginning to feel in a very direct way, which we'll be talking about, this subtle grief that's almost always there, beginning to feel it somatically. What is it like to be in your body? Is the gateway then to feeling compassion for being in a body. And in this compassion then, we're no longer having the same relationship with all of the ugliness, the ignorance, the violence that's going on in the world. We have compassion for it. There's a spacious heart. There is such a conditioning, though, behind our hearts contracting because we're identified with the false self. Now, clearly, we need to distinguish between the self that does exist conventionally. I'm Dale, you're not Dale. You're John, you're Patty, you're Judith, you're whoever you are out there. But there's another self that doesn't exist at all. And that's this thinking that there's an inherent solid being who's controlling life. And to the extent that we're identified with that, there is this ongoing grief because in that identification, we're feeling then separate from God. We're feeling separate from ourselves. We're feeling separate from each other. And it's often not this big thing that's right in our face. It's a much more subtle sense of ennui, a subtle sense of angst that moment to moment, something seems just a little bit off. And even when you're having these moments where everything seems perfect, somewhere in the background, you know that it's going to go away. You know that it's going to come back to this feeling of separation. Here's a segment of a poem by Mary Oliver. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. Okay, so reality is uncomplicated. delusion is very complicated. We're talking here about going beyond understanding emptiness to directly experiencing it. The nature of compassion is understanding, living, opening to the empty nature of reality, of life itself. And by emptiness, it doesn't mean nothingness. It doesn't mean that nothing's there. It's a way of perceiving without grasping, a way of perceiving that isn't based on this delusion of this ongoing intrinsic separate self. But because we're living in that delusion all the time, there's no contrast. And when there's no contrast, it's hard to feel it. Without heat, it's hard to feel cold. Without light, it's hard to experience dark if it's always the same, right? So this primary delusion, this contraction that reality is solid, it's not empty or spacious, is what is causing this grief. The experience of emptiness is grief-producing and harmful to the ego, but is beyond suffering, so that this sense of self is rarely felt. And this is the result of the primary delusion or contraction. The sense of self, it's like the ego is pinched or it's the contracted awareness. And understanding and feeling this contraction in the body, having compassion for it, then leads very directly into this possibility of this tantric relationship with life. Meister Eckhart says, in the voice of God, everything is grace. Everything is grace. God is showing you that existence is grace. And it's very difficult to experience that as long as we haven't gotten into a much more intimate relationship with this subtle grief that we're going around with all the time. So the practice I've been doing, I find this difficult to do in the middle of the day when I'm talking to you guys right now, or I'm on the computer, or I'm driving my car out. But I lie down on my bed for as long as I can stand it, like maybe an hour and a half or something, and just get more and more relaxed and begin to get in touch with, first of all, these notions that I'm doing something. But I begin to feel these sensations in my body beginning to release as I'm having this more empty relationship with what I'm experiencing. It's not like I'm trying to push anything away. It's not like I'm trying to change anything, but just to be as completely simple and easy and relaxed as I can possibly be, just letting that happen. And my experience then is I begin to feel compassion for this subtle contraction that I tend to pick up in my daily activity, and begin then to feel that the sensations in the body are a reflection of wholeness, that it's like each moment experiencing it for the first time, not just the pleasant experiences, not just the beautiful sensations, but the difficult or the painful ones. So that we're going from this grief, because we're feeling separate, to compassion for this grief. And in this compassion, revealing the empty nature of the heart. And then this tantric understanding begins to awaken. Now, maybe that sounds like a lot of words, but it's a very somatic, immediate, intimate process that can be experienced right now. The going from sensation, just being with sensation without trying to change them, without thinking I'm feeling sensation, just being with sensation and letting sensation reveal presence, surrendering into sensation, revealing presence, moment to moment to moment. And then occasionally this deeper practice of really diving in for a longer period of time when you're really relaxed and allowing the body to be doing just what it wants to do. So my first meditation teacher, Suzuki Roshi, said, to a student, you're all perfect, but there's still room for improvement. And that's kind of the conundrum here, that we're holding in our body the places we think we need improvement, and we're perfect at the same time. So that can we relax into that perfection? And the perfection doesn't mean there won't be physical pain. The perfection doesn't mean there won't be cancer. The perfection doesn't mean you're going to like your job, right? But you know who I'm talking to. Okay. So after experiencing the boundless nature of the heart, our sense of I remains, but now it is only one small point in the vast spaciousness, no longer front and center, no longer right in our face. Our open heart reveals the sacred nature of all things, including ourselves. We become empowered. All experience, even difficult emotions, are perceived as awakened energy. With this radical approach, we transform difficulties into the wisdom that frees us, beyond concepts, beyond projections. Confusion dissolves as we directly see that everything is already awake. Each emotion has a healing message. Spiritual practice and life itself are no longer a struggle to improve ourselves, but an almost effortless surrender into what we have always been. Rather than approaching life from a sense of poverty and need, we devour it with a sense of romance and abundance. The beloved can only be everything. So that's the path of Tantra. The beloved can only be everything, even this. And sometimes it's easier to feel it in incredibly beautiful moments. Sometimes the really difficult moments reveal it. For me, the most difficult are the neutral moments. Most of life is neutral, right? Most of life is not incredibly beautiful or incredibly ugly, but you're going to the toilet, or you're chopping your vegetables, or you're climbing in your car, or you're trying to go to sleep at night, or all these, so many moments where we just kind of go to sleep because of the intensity is not really there. It's just existence itself. And to begin to awaken in those neutral moments, in those, taking those opportunities to see that it's not about the content, it's about the nature of content, right? In Tantra, we're letting go of our identity. It's a surrender of the identity into this wisdom that it's all sacred, that it's all sacred, it's all changing. Tantra is not about renunciation or even gradually transforming obstacles through compassion, but seeing the entire world as divine, as a manifestation of the mother with a capital M. Yoga teaches suppression with awareness, gradually eliminating obstacles through control. Tantra is the releasing of all goals and attainments. Let go of all attachment through love. Tantra teaches that every cell that exists is filled with pure awareness. Indulgence with awareness. It's kind of slightly dangerous, indulgence with awareness. The beloved can only be everything. So if we take a difficult emotion like anger, anger is hard to work with through mindfulness and compassion. It's hard to be mindful of anger. It comes so quickly. It's so hot. There's somebody or something out there that you're really angry at. But is it possible to see that anger is a tantric message, that anger is a natural response to what's going on in life and not get caught in it? Anger's not good or bad. It's just tricky. I have in the past talked about something I kind of jokingly call, maybe not jokingly, but humorously call the tantric three-step of healing. There's the country's two-step dance. There's the tantric three-step. And the tantric three-step is the direct path to healing. The first step is being here now. Mindfulness, embodied mindfulness. Something can't be healed. You can't see something as whole if you can't be with it in the first place. An emotion's arising, sensations are happening, a situation is happening. What does it feel like in your body? Letting go of the story, letting go of the narrative, the concepts, the projections. This is what it feels like. Again and again, talked about how in English we say, I am afraid. In Spanish, yo tengo miedo, I have fear. Tibetan, fear is here. As long as we think I am afraid or I am angry, then it's harder not to get really caught in this arising emotion. So the first step is not I am angry, but there are these angry sensations in my body right now. It doesn't matter who's out there, what's out there that I'm being angry about. What does it feel like? Nakedly contacting the anger. And then having compassion for this grief because we've been lost in the sensation again and again in our lives. This empty quality of the heart that is the nature of compassion then reveals the third step of the Tantric three-step, which is the Tantric reality that anger is just awakened energy. Anger is just as much God as calmness is God. The beloved can only be everything, right? If in fact we're not really, if you're somebody who's saying, I've got to push my anger away, in terms of martial arts, anger is going to be fighting back, push, pull. Yes, in the beginning of practice, we might need to spend some time working with the places that really overwhelm us. But a lot of people in this room are fairly advanced practitioners who I think are at a point where we can begin to relax, be easy and simple, not trying to fix ourselves, but begin to appreciate the sacred nature of even this and even this and even this. Compassion has the quality of sadness because there is suffering, but a joy that transcends happiness and sadness, a joy that your heart is open. And that joy is what is revealing this tantric truth. The heart is so open, it's so joyful, even though there is suffering, that there can be joy even when your relative is having a really hard time, or people are killing each other in various parts of the world, and even in our neighborhoods. All that arises is awakened energy. The world is sacred. We are already awake and go beyond avoiding difficulty and self-improvement. Pain is part of life and not a mistake. Everything is grace. I had a very rough version of this talk I gave to my group on Wednesday night, and there's one woman who every time I say everything is grace, she argues with me. She says, I can't believe that everything is grace. Grace is a tricky word because it has certain connotations in Christianity, that grace is something that God gives us if you're good enough or something like that. But Ram Dass had this saying, suffering is grace. And that's kind of at the heart of what we're talking about today. Suffering is grace. If you want to awaken, if you want to be present, if you want to realize that you are love, suffering is grace, because it is showing you where you don't trust the tantric awake nature of experience, of life itself, of every cell in your body. Opening to grace in every moment by seeing no distinction between sacred and mundane. Catching hold of the first moment of perception without naming it, but resting in the feeling, the vibration of the arising perception. Digesting emotions rather than being digested by them. One of the ways of doing this, in my experience, is mantra. There's mantra from the sense of tantra. Beginning mantra is you're saying, God, please show up. And then your mantra deepens. There's a love relationship with the object of the mantra. But in tantra, the mantra is the deity. And the person saying the mantra is the deity. When I say Ram, there is absolutely no difference between that sound and the deity that that sound manifests and I who is saying it, right? It's not like the mantra is pointing to something. The mantra is everything. The whole universe is densely permeated with the name of God. So that as long as there's some notion of an external God out there and a lower being who's relating to the higher being, then we're falling out of this tantric relationship. There's some sense of I need to improve myself so that I can be with that God. In Tantra, you are the deity, but only after you have worked enough with mindfulness and compassion so that you have been able to be with that grief of separation. Here's another quote from Suzuki Roshi. When you bow to Buddha, you should have no idea of Buddha, which is become one with Buddha himself. When you become one with Buddha, one with everything that exists, you find the true meaning of being. When you forget all your dualistic ideas, everything becomes your teacher and everything can be an object of worship. It's a very tantric saying, even though Suzuki Roshi, I'm sure, never thought about Tantra in the sense that we're talking about it here. And Maharaji said, and it's really been my experience, that to become free, you really have to understand the mother. And what we're talking about today is surrender to the mother, loving the mother, realizing the mother is everything. India is often called Mother India. And if you go to India and you want it to be kind of like America, but a bit more romantic and interesting, you're going to have an incredibly difficult time there. It can be so frustrating. But if you surrender to Mother India, let her take care of you, it can be a profoundly transformative experience. And it doesn't have to be going to India. It can be going to the grocery store. It's surrender to the mother, right? Surrender to the traffic jam, surrender to the prices of how much potato chips are these days. So seeing everything as if seeing it for the first time. A beautiful object, an ordinary person, an ugly object, seeing it for the first time. Getting in touch with our subtle grief, the grief that arises from identification with illusory self, having compassion for that grief, being with the sensations of that grief, opening into this tantric relationship with all experience. I will now open this up to discussion. As you remember, I muted everybody.
Hi, Dale. It's Carly.
Thank you for saving us.
Well, it just so happens that the topic you're covering is in awesome alignment for me. And I even, like, in my heart of hearts in the last week or so was like, I need to have a conversation with Dale about this. And you're having a conversation with everybody. So I'm super grateful. With the separateness subject and the grief subject, and you had said, like, it's the subtle grief, not necessarily specific grief. And lately I've been, noting and being present with this feeling of separateness, but also asking myself, like, how does that separateness show up? Like, what makes the separateness somehow creep in? And so I try not to, like, always correct myself and find the why, but I've just been contemplating, like, okay, this grief separateness feeling is here, but how did that slip in? And, you spoke a lot about, there's the grief and the separateness and the compassion for the separateness. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about how that separateness just sort of slides in and kind of slams a person upside the head when they feel like they have a super open heart and suddenly they feel isolated and very separate.
Well, I thought you were going to ask a different question. So at first, I'd like to answer the question that I thought you were going to ask.
Well, that would be helpful too, because I'm good at asking those sort of questions.
I thought you were going to say, what about big grief? What about when somebody's dying? And I'm sure there are a lot of people in this room. I know for a fact there are some people in this room who are deeply grieving an intense situation with people in relationship to people they love. It's difficult to start dealing with that big grief if you haven't done the kind of grief work we're talking about here. If one learns to be with the subtle grief, the grief of losing yourself, then it's going to be hard to deal with the big grief. So that this moment-to-moment grief, the sense of there's this kind of anxiety that keeps arising because something feels off. That anxiety is the expression of this grief that I'm talking about. And learning to be with that, feeling it in the body, doing that deep relaxation without trying to transform anything or transmute anything as a way of diving into and underneath this subtle grief is preparation for the big grief. Then in answer to the question that you really asked, that is one of the frustrating and ongoing qualities of the spiritual path, that we expect that when we get to a certain understanding, we're going to be able to integrate it. And in my experience, my very frustrating experience, is that it's up and down again and again and again. There's some gradual movement in the direction of wholeness, but it seems like we're going backward and forward. If you have a period of your life, whether it's a few moments in a very intensified way or a few weeks in a more spread out way, where you're feeling really good, everything is flowing, God is everywhere, that spaciousness then allows another layer of stuff that you've suppressed down into the belly to come bubbling up. And until you're an enlightened being, there's going to be stuff that you haven't looked at yet, that you haven't been able to look at yet. It hasn't been time yet. So that it comes in spurts, it comes in chunks. And those chunks can be moment to moment to moment or bigger ones in the way that you were talking about. Working with the frustration of, okay, now I understand something, but I'm not living it, right? So there's this gap. You read something in a book, a teacher says something, there's a spontaneous understanding, and you say, wow, this is the way it is. And you can even live it for 5 minutes or a day or something. And then boom, you're back in it. It's like taking a psychedelic, right? You have this experience like, whoa, there's reality. I'm going to stay here forever. Obviously, this is true. And you wake up tomorrow and you're 99.99% as neurotic as the day before you took the psychedelic, right? I mean, that's what happens. Maybe you've got some interesting stuff to put in your journal, but the momentum of the illusory self, of the belief in the illusory self, the momentum of the karmic holding is strong, and it has to be experienced. So,
I guess the grace for me in the moment was, I mean, the depth of the separateness was severe, and I just spoke with a friend about this, is that I just kept giving myself love and reminding myself that just as the beautiful, rich moments come and go, this too will also pass. That part, I think, was super helpful with the practice. Yeah. But I think that what you're saying is helpful, because I can imagine definitely my layers that I'm working through, because I had just come off of a weekend that I spent with my dad, who I'm super close with and I adore. And we had a lovely weekend. And there was also the reality in there of like, he too will die, which I've already known. But I think that even though like consciously I was okay in processing the fact that my father will die one day, I think there are layers of just this deep grief that I was getting an opportunity to practice in a light way with him still being here. Right. And maybe that's why I just dropped to this crazy, intense sadness like this. And I was just present with it, Dale. I just sat with it because it was so big and so deep and broad that I literally felt like I had a weight blanket on my body and there was no escaping it. And I didn't want to escape it. And what you're saying is the separateness. And I'm like, so where's the separateness coming from? The grief of losing a parent is quite huge, especially when you're very close with them. And I'm doing enough to recognize that one day my dad's going to die. So it's an intense moment. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Sounds like you're doing just what you need to do. Meadows. Let's do a 15-minute or so guided meditation. Begin, please, by invoking that which you trust. Trust more than the mind. That gives you the trust to be able to surrender into the next moment. Absolute truth cannot be realized through the mind, but really only through the heart. Is there some subtle sense of separation? Some sense of subtle grief or anxiety that permeates the background of your experience? Can you begin to feel that as sensations in your body? Places where there's holding. Grief expressed as anxiety. Feeling separate from God, feeling separate from each other, from yourself. Sometimes these sensations are strong, sometimes very subtle. But only seldom are we completely open to this union, to this oneness. It is a rare person who isn't offended by the empty nature of the heart, the empty nature of experience. Emptiness offends the ego. And this fundamental delusion, this fundamental contraction, believing that things are solid, that we are solid and independent, continues so constantly that we often miss it. Nothing to push away, nothing to suppress. Becoming intimate with even this. What does it feel like in the body? Open awareness, meeting feelings, emotions, without any goal. Meeting directly what is there. Turning towards it, no matter what the content. Feeling it, feeling the message. Allowing emotion to emerge. Just being with what is there in your body. Be alert to any impulse to try to fix it. Surrender into the body. Trusting the wisdom of these bodily sensations. Very little effort needed. The rawness of the feelings, the rawness of the emotions. The emptiness cease to be so scary as we ease into them. Sensations dissolving into presence. The very nature of each experience, regardless of the content, pure presence. experiencing this quality of emptiness, of non-grasping. Is compassion, a sense of connection, of spacious connection with each arising. Rather than being lost in the content, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Resting in the wisdom that each arising is equally a reflection of the beloved. The body is a microcosm of the entire universe. Opening to grace in every moment. And this includes realizing that there is suffering in the world, not other than the grace, naturally arising compassion for all sentient beings who are suffering. As an expression of your true nature without even doing anything. Please open your eyes. Look around the room as if you were seeing things for the very first time. Things that are beautiful, things that are ordinary, beyond concept.